On the morning of October 17th, 2022, everything seemed to be going on as normal at Cheongseong Penitentiary, in the countryside of Gyeonggi Province. The weather was cool, the sky was clear, and the prison yard was still damp from the previous night's light rain. At 6:45 a.m., one of the security guards, Han Ji-won, commented in the cafeteria that the day was going to be tough. It wasn't because of a premonition, but because she knew that in a few hours, Park Min-jae would be executed, a prisoner, for almost 6 years, convicted of a brutal murder to which he never confessed. The routine continued, as it does in these places: strict protocols, serious faces, and a constant presence of silence in the corridors, broken only by radios and the sound of electronic gates. No one discussed the case openly, but among the older employees, there was a discreet unease in the air. Perhaps it was because of Min-jae's last request, which had been exceptionally accepted, to see his dog, Bari, for the last time. Seo-jin arrived around 9:20 a.m., holding a faded blue leash and trying to contain the agitation of the spotted mutt she had been raising since her ex-fiancée's arrest. She said nothing as she passed through the security checkpoint, just handed over the documents, signed where they asked, and followed the instructions. Those who saw her at the time commented later on how out of it she seemed, not in the sense of being out of control, but as if she was just functioning on automatic. Bari kept pulling on the leash, recognizing the surroundings, the smell, maybe even the voices. From the beginning, it was uncertain whether they would actually let the animal into the cell, but director Yoon Seo-jin had personally authorized it. She herself was strangely involved in the case, according to some employees. They said that after reviewing the records a few days earlier, something there had gotten to her, and that was just the beginning of what was to come. Around 10 a.m., Park Min-jae was taken from his cell to the preparation area, a small windowless room where only one officer, one administrative staff member, and, that day, Director Young were stationed. He was calm, as he had been for the past few months, but there was something different in his eyes. He asked bluntly if Bari had arrived yet. Young said yes. Within minutes, the dog was brought to the secluded courtyard, where a simple white tent had been set up to allow the visit. When Min-jae saw Bari, something in him seemed to melt. He didn't cry. He didn't say anything. He just crouched down and hugged the dog tightly. Those who saw it didn't forget. The dog threw himself on top of him as if the 6 years hadn't passed. The scene even made the security officer look away for a moment. No one there knew yet what was about to happen that morning. Meanwhile, a few blocks away, retired Inspector Choi Hyun-woo parked his car in front of the old Cheongseong Central Police Station. He was carrying a cardboard box, filled with documents he should never have kept but couldn't bring himself to throw away. In the last few days, something had made him reread those papers. Poorly filled out reports, disregarded evidence, and a report that had been changed before Min-jae's trial. He knew he had made a mistake by not reporting it years ago, but now it was different. When he heard about the scheduled execution, something snapped inside him. He went to Prosecutor Lee Jun-ho's office, even without an appointment, and demanded to be interviewed. The prosecutor reluctantly agreed to see the documents. And it was there, leafing through the already yellowed material, that he realized the story didn't add up. Something very serious had been covered up. Prosecutor Lee was known for being methodical and tough. He wasn't the type to change his mind easily, but he wasn't stupid. When he analyzed the papers Choi had brought, he found serious inconsistencies. Dates swapped, signatures that didn't belong to the actual experts in the case, and most importantly, the absence of images from a security camera that was included in the initial report but had disappeared from the official file. This alone was enough to request an immediate stay of execution. The problem was time. It was already after 11 a.m., and according to protocol, Min-jae was supposed to be transferred to the final wing in less than an hour. Lee picked up the phone and called the penitentiary directly. He asked to speak to Young. He didn't explain much, just said, "Something's wrong. You need to hold this. Give me an hour." Yoon, who was already uneasy about the dog's visit and Min-jae's behavior, didn't question it. He just said he would do what he could. Inside the prison, as the final procedures were being prepared, an unusual movement spread among some employees. A new officer said he had seen documents being printed in a hurry in the administrative sector. Another said he had heard the director on the phone talking about stopping the procedure. No one knew exactly what was happening, but it was clear that something out of the ordinary was happening. Min-jae, still with Bari by his side, seemed oblivious to all of this. Sitting on the floor, he stroked the dog's neck in silence. He didn't ask for anything, didn't complain, didn't say a single word of anger. Seo-jin was a few meters away, watching the two. It was as if, for a few minutes, everything that had happened in the last 6 years had dissolved in that meeting. But time was against them, and no one there knew if this would be the end or the beginning. At noon sharp, a police car from the public prosecutor's office pulled up in front of the penitentiary. Prosecutor Lee got out of the car with his briefcase in hand and didn't even wait to be announced. Yoon was already waiting for him in the lobby. They locked themselves in a makeshift room for almost 20 minutes. Outside, the atmosphere was one of absolute tension. People passing by in the hallways avoided eye contact, as if even breathing loudly was risky. When Yoon left the room, her face was tense, but firm. She picked up the internal phone and ordered all proceedings to be suspended. In effect, this meant that the execution was on hold, at least for now. It was the first time in more than 10 years as director that she had made such a decision without a direct order from the court. But she knew what she was doing. The evidence the prosecutor had in his hands was not just doubt. It was clear evidence that Min-jae might be innocent. Still, no one celebrated. Jung asked for Min-jae to be taken back to his cell and authorized Bari to stay with him for a little longer on an exceptional basis. Seo-jin, trembling, nodded in thanks. This was not a victory. It was a delay, but it was all they had. Silence reigned in the cell. Min-jae sat in the corner with the dog and stared into space. The last hour had passed in a blur. He didn't ask any more questions, perhaps out of fear, of creating hope. Outside, the prosecutor was already calling the judge on duty, explaining the urgency. He said he needed 48 hours. There was no guarantee of anything. But that day, through a series of small decisions, from the dog's visit to the remorse of a retired inspector, a life that had already been considered over was postponed. And this postponement, for someone who is about to die, is everything. At 1:47 p.m., the temporary stay of execution was officially communicated to the prison by email and phone. Yoon printed out the document, signed it, and sent a copy to the judge's office as a protocol. Everything was done with the utmost care because any mistake could be interpreted as insubordination. At this point, what had been just an unusual request from a convict took on a new dimension. Several employees who had previously been skeptical began to quietly discuss the case in the hallways. Min-jae's story, which until then had been seen as closed, began to circulate again, this time in a different light. Seo-jin did not speak to anyone, but remained outside the cell, sitting on the floor, waiting for some resolution. Yoon went to her late in the afternoon, bent down and said, "He will not die today." That was the only thing she could say, and that was enough. Seo-jin did not respond. She just put her hand on her head and began to cry. At the end of the day, when the administrative areas had emptied, Yoon returned to her office and looked out the second floor window, which had a partial view of the inner courtyard. Min-jae was still there, sitting with Bari, now calmer. That image would not leave her mind anytime soon. On the table next to it, the prosecutor's file remained open, with all the documents organized in chronological order. It contained evidence of tampering, contradictory testimonies, and a discreet mention of a name that, until that moment, had never been formally included in the case. Kang Dae-sung, a man linked to cleaning services for high-ranking business figures. It was clear to Yoon that this went far beyond a miscarriage of justice. and that perhaps, by insisting on seeing her dog, Min-jae had unwittingly opened the only loophole that someone needed to hear the truth. As night fell, the prison resumed its calmer rhythm, but something had changed forever in that place. Min-jae, now protected by a stay of execution, didn't know exactly what to expect, but for the first time he felt a faint hope, a feeling he had barely remembered. Seo-jin stayed there, taking care of Bari and trying to stay calm, although with each passing minute her anxiety grew. Yoon, in the silence of her office, prepared the next steps so that justice could finally begin to work as it should. She knew that the road would be long, full of battles and exhaustion, but that night she saw that Min-jae's life would not end the way everyone imagined. What happened that day was not just a suspension of a sentence. It was a moment of choice between accepting an unjust fate or fighting to change a story that seemed written. The simple request to see his dog, Bari, made ordinary people, an ex-fiancée, a prison warden, a prosecutor, an inspector, cross paths in a plot that no one wanted to admit. Min-jae left his cell that afternoon as someone still in prison, but different. Someone who had been given more time to prove that he was not guilty. And although no one knows exactly how it will all end, it is certain that that day changed everything. To this day, in the silence of Cheongseong Penitentiary, people still talk about that moment when life held on for one last chance, the chance of a man and his dog.